Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today, my topic is Putin's message from China. As we all know, the world is discussing the recent Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in China, and then following it, the military parade. And then after that, Putin gave an interview which actually was not noticed by most observers, and it was to Russian media. And the favorite, as they say, the favorite correspondent Zarubin was there asking questions, and RT and Kommersant and Channel 1 of Russian TV, and they asked very interesting questions. In a sense, Putin summed up his message to the West in that press conference. And there are some things that are quite interesting and in some ways are new. And this is what I want to discuss today. Now, the first thing, of course, is to say a few words about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is noticed by most observers, and it was interpreted by Western media as a kind of a rise of the Eastern Bloc against the West. And of course, both Xi and Putin went out of this way to explain this meeting not as against the West, but as a meeting where the principle of multipolarity and of sovereignty of nations is the core, rather than the kind of we could say energetic isolationism of the United States with tariffs against many countries, or the regime of sanctions against Russia practiced by the European Union. So at the press conference, there were many questions, and let me focus on some of the most interesting ones. Well, the first one was on sanctions, and here usually Putin repeats the same thing, that the sanctions are illegal, that sanctions could only be announced by the Security Council of the United Nations and so on. But today, yesterday, he spoke about sanctions in the context of sovereignty, and especially in the context of Trump's threat to impose sanctions on China and India for buying Russian oil. And as we all know, Senator Graham was talking about crushing sanctions against Russia when India and China would have to stop buying Russian oil. Well, if anything, the last meeting, the last few days have shown that nothing of the sort. Both China and India have restated their commitment to buy Russian oil. And what is even more important is that there was a trilateral meeting of China, Mongolia, and Russia, and they signed a new accord, which is a definite going to be built, what is called a pipeline Power of Siberia 2. Now, the current rate of Russian gas sales to China is, I believe, at 38 billion cubic meters. And once this pipeline is completed, it should go to 100 billion cubic meters. So that basically means, and what's interesting is that pipeline runs from Yamal, and that's in the north of Siberia, and the Nord Stream 2 to Germany also runs from Yamal. Essentially, what it means symbolically is reorientation of Russian oil and gas export to Asia, and specifically to China and to India. And under construction is a route through Iran to the rest of Asia. So that's basically, in economic terms, the most important message to the West, which means that your sanctions don't work, that anything that Russia lost in Western markets, it has replaced with the Eastern ones. Moreover, it's interesting that the Europeans are now buying expensive American liquefied gas, and the Chinese are getting a cheap Russian gas that the Europeans used to have. In economic terms, it basically means a free ride to China. to benefit from the discount of the Russian gas. That, of course, can propel its competitive industry even more vis-a-vis the American and the European industry. Now we move on to the second important issue, which was really not Putin, but Putin supported it, and that was the Chairman Xi idea of a new world governance. Now, the specifics are not clear, but what is emerging from this is that both the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS are moving towards what they call multipolarity, but what really means as economic independence from Western economic institutions such as the World Bank and IMF. They are launching a new Shanghai Cooperation Organization bank in addition to the one that was proclaimed to be set up in BRICS last meeting. And also they are reaffirming their commitment to make their payments in national currency. In other words, the trade in oil or other trade that is in the hundreds of billions is not going to be in dollars. Moreover, recently one could add to it that the sale of Saudi Arabian oil to China will be in yuan, in the Chinese currency, which means that slowly but surely the dominance of the dollar as the international currency for international trade is giving way to yuan, to Chinese currency, which is going to be pegged against other currencies of the region, and increasingly the world is shifting its trade patterns to China. Now, also in terms of the strategic importance of the Shanghai meeting, of course, was that in addition to all these invited countries, there were, as many observers have mentioned already, 3 NATO members, and that is the Foreign Minister of Hungary, the Fico of Slovakia, and Erdogan of Turkey. All 3 are closely aligned with Russia, at least in its economic policies. Turkey especially is trying to play a pivot between East and West, and since it was denied access to Europe and the European Union, it is an observer status in Shanghai Cooperation Organization and is moving in the direction of membership, which is extremely important. Not to mention that Azerbaijan and Armenia were also there, but their membership is probably going to be delayed until they figure out how to overcome their differences with Russia. Finally, we come to perhaps the most important issue of what Putin answered to several questions on Ukraine. Now, he again, as he did in Anchorage and afterwards, he again praised President Trump. And he said that during the parade, there was nobody who said anything bad about the United States or Trump, and he went out of his way to say that Trump's peace initiative is very important, etc., etc., etc. But I'm looking for, did he say anything new? Did he say anything that sheds light on the plans of Putin, and that means of Russia, in regard to the war or special military operation in Ukraine? And I think he did. He basically, his main point is that Russia will achieve its all, and I want to emphasize the word all in his answer, all political and military objectives, either by peaceful settlement or by military means. In other words, he said the Russian troops are advancing on all the fronts and the peaceful settlement is still possible. He said that Trump asked him to meet Zelensky, and Putin explained for quite a long time what that entails. He has said, yes, he can come to Moscow anytime and we can sign a peace settlement. It is still possible. But here are the problems that were in great detail, Putin explained. The problem is, as he explained, that the Ukrainian constitution does not allow for the extension of the term of the president. Zelensky's term has expired more than a year ago. And therefore, he is just basically, as Putin called him, a person who is executing the powers of the president. Now, in order for his signature to mean anything, there should be new elections. But new elections cannot happen until there is a state of emergency, which was proclaimed at the beginning of this conflict. So the first thing that needs to be done, Zelensky needs to lift the ban he himself imposed on himself by banning any negotiations with Putin. The second thing that should happen is the new elections of the new president. And then it has to be confirmed by the Constitutional Court. But the chairman of the Constitutional Court is in exile, and without that, the elections wouldn't be valid. And then, he said, and after that, there could be a legitimate authority with whom we can sign a peace accord. Now, concerning the peace accord itself, he repeated what had been said by the Russians many times, and that is no NATO membership, no foreign troops, limitations on the armed forces of Ukraine, and then the question of borders. And that is where there's something interesting that happened. He did not specify. He kind of showed some flexibility by saying that borders are not that important for us. What we really want is the citizens and their rights, Russian nationality persons who live in Ukraine, that they have their language, that they have their right of Orthodox religion, etc. So this seems like a kind of a flexibility that Putin is showing, that the borders is something to be discussed. At the same time, he said we are advancing, and the realities on the ground should be taken. Now, what I would like to add to it is that somebody didn't pick it up, but they should have. Is that just a few days ago, Mr. Gerasimov, the chief of the general staff of the Russian army, made a very interesting announcement or report. And as he was reporting on the advancement of Russian forces during the last 3 months, the map behind him clearly showed what a lot of people call Novorossiya, which is New Russia, which is a historic lands that were not a part of Ukraine before Lenin and Stalin gave those lands of Donbass to Ukraine. The historical map that showed Odessa and Kharkov and Nikolaev as part of the Russian Federation, as part of historical Russia, which many observers, including myself, found very interesting and very revealing. Because if we follow the Russian media and the Russian debates in the military and elsewhere, a lot of people are saying that 4 regions of Donbass is not good enough, that historically Russian-speaking city of Odessa and of Kharkov should be a part of the Russian Federation. On top of it, I can add for myself that I follow several bloggers from Odessa on a pretty much daily basis, and there is a kind of a Odessa underground or Odessa Russia sympathizers who really are waiting for the arrival of the Russians because Odessa had been given to Ukraine by Lenin in 1922. So in other words, my point here is that there is a slight discrepancy between what Gerasimov said and what Putin said. And Putin didn't say much, he just skirted and avoided the issue of the exact borders in this interview. So finally, let me conclude. What is the message of President Putin to the West and to Ukraine and to President Trump? The message seems to be to Europe very clear. We can manage just fine without you and with your sanctions by strengthening our pivot to Asia by anything that we do not sell to Europe, we can sell and more to Asia. And that means China and India and other countries in Asia. Second message is that there are countries in Europe, and they may be increasing in number, such as Hungary, Slovakia, Serbia, Turkey, potentially others, who do not want to escalate conflict with Russia and who would like to restore normal trading relationship with Russia after the conflict in Ukraine is settled. The message to Trump is that Putin still hopes for an improvement of Russian relations and a peaceful settlement, but on terms that Russia finds important and not flexible. Some of them are flexible, such as borders. And finally, the message to Zelensky is that it is not too late. It is still possible to conclude it on peaceful means by reaching a compromise, accepting the most crucial Russian conditions. And if not, then the war will continue until, as he put it, all Russian tasks of the special operation are met. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon with another edition of Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. And please subscribe, please write your comments. I try to answer most of them. And if you're interested in my biography, in personal narratives, there are 2 parts of my long interview discussing my ideas and my life and career. So welcome. Bye-bye.